Country Joe and the Fish, Greatest Hits. This is an album I got from the Wycombe Arts Centre vinyl sale. I think I paid about £12 for it. When I was first becoming seriously interested in rock music, I seem to recall that if someone was asked to pick an example of West Coast or San Franciscan druggy hippie psychedelic music, often the first thing they would say would be Country Joe and the Fish. Possibly because of the name, and possibly because of a short clip in the Woodstock film, which is actually just Country Joe. Now they are possibly the least remembered of the participants in that Haight-Ashbury scene. Behind the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, Santana, Janis Joplin, and even Quicksilver Messenger Service. Someone once asked me to find them a copy of the second Country Joe and the Fish album, which I did, and I copied it, but I was not particularly impressed. I have seen the Woodstock clip many times where Country Joe spells out the F word and gets the crowd to respond. He then sings a very clever anti-war song. The second Country Joe and the Fish album starts with the "Gimme an F, what's that spell" routine. However, it spells out F-I-S-H, fish. And the Fixing For to Die song seems rather chirpy and weak compared to the Woodstock version. I found this greatest hits and thought I would give them another go, and I was so impressed with this LP that I then bought the CD of their first album and was once again disappointed. This may be partly because I believe that 60s recordings sound better on vinyl, and partly because one of the things that made the Fish distinctive was a rather cheap sounding electric organ, the nastiness of which is probably exaggerated by being digitised. Country Joe was a man named Joe McDonald, who I was surprised to find has a very nice singing voice, not unlike Tim Buckley or Marty Balin. His regular guitarist was a man named Barry Melton, who was nicknamed the Fish, and the band was a changeable unit built around these two. I find Melton's guitar to be quite interesting. It is often quite distorted and abrasive, yet it seems to fit perfectly with even the more dreamier songs. They were possibly one of the bands that most supported all things counterculture and peace and love, man. But their music is surprisingly conventional, much less experimental than the Grateful Dead's Anthem of the Sun and Dark Star, or Jefferson Airplane's After Bathing at Baxter, or anything Pink Floyd and Soft Machine were doing here in Blighty. There is a song called Maria that is so conventional it sounds a bit like Clive Dunn's Grandad. However, it was written as a letter from a war zone with details of atrocities. The album finishes with a song called Here I Go Again, which is a song with a very commercial production. It is a song that made me glad to have bought the album, and I found myself replaying it several times. It is an extremely catchy number that I knew I recognised, but I'd never heard this version. I later found out it had been a minor hit for Twiggy. Country Joe and the Fish seemed to be a mix of beat poetry, country, folk, pop and rock, similar to the first two Jefferson Airplane albums and Arthur Lee's Love, with some occasional strange textures from unusual sounding instruments, a bit like the Incredible String Band. Sometimes they sound like a less disciplined version of The Doors with a stand-in keyboard player playing a bargain basement keyboard. Though I really like this album, the fact that it claims to be their greatest hits does not suggest they have a great catalogue waiting to be explored. Country Joe and the Fish, Greatest Hits.